about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back to another live stream of Warrior Creed with me, as always, the radical Maajid Nawaz and my brother, the infamous Usman Raja. 2024, Usman.
Yeah, 2024. What a strange start to the year. So,
well, a lot's going down, a lot's going to happen, and I think this year is going to be quite a decisive one, considering it's almost like, for me personally, going through a time or like a wormhole, a time warp from 2019 to now. Everything's been quite the blur, but we're here, and I think this year is going to be an incredibly significant year. Let's start by the fact that already on the first of the year, and it's the topic of what we're discussing today, what we've known for a long time, of course, because the list, both of the flight logs and Epstein's black book, has been in my possession since at least 2019, if I can remember the date correctly, but that's at least since I've had both doing my work as I do as a broadcaster. And the only reason I haven't published any of that is because, of course, it's all available on the internet, but as most people, we call them the normies or whatever, they require for a verified and recognized brand to publish something we already knew about before they believe it. Well, now that's happened, and that's the topic of today's live stream, and it is about this man, Bill Clinton, because whether it's as we're live on air right now or has already happened, basically the courts has ordered the release of the names, many names, around 170, there's obviously more than that, of those that were named in the court documents during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. And at the top of that list, as the New York Post is already reporting, is Bill Clinton, to be unmasked as John Doe 36 and identified more than 50 times in the Jeffrey Epstein document dump. You can see the headline there from the New York Post. That's what I've just read from. That's published there. You can see on December the 31st, 2023. So that is due to be dropped any moment now. It probably will happen while we're live on this stream. And the point is that despite the fact that we've already known this, it catapults the story into the public imagination, because no amount of publishing that black book on Reddit or the flight logs on any other blog, even radical media, as good as it may be, would have captured the public imagination as much as the corporatist media now beginning to run with the story. And of course, it's not lost on us that this is election year. So there's going to be a lot more such stories. While we're on this note, before we move on to analyze what's going on here and connect it as I will to Israel, Mossad, and what's going on right now in Gaza, which is going to be the subject of how this all connects together. But before we do, just a few more pointers for everybody. Keep in mind that 2024 will see many revelations. Apocalypse, the word, means the unveiling, the uncovering. And so we are going to witness an apocalypse this year, an unveiling, the lifting of the curtain in a way that most people haven't yet imagined. And those of us who've been speaking about this for a while, in a way that will finally, I believe, vindicate a lot of what we've been saying. And though, of course, we're not doing this for credit, will allow us to sit back and observe the fact that others are finally catching up to things that they had deemed us insane for saying for a long time. And that's what we're witnessing. Among those things, don't forget, there isn't just the Epstein client list and everything related to that, the flight logs and the black book. There's also, keep in mind, the Hunter Biden laptop, a unrelated scandal, yet related because it still relates to criminally compromising material caught on politicians, by politicians and their families. And all of that was used, of course. The story was suffocated in order to interfere with the 2020 elections, which is also all going to come out. And that's what 2024 brings. In addition, we ask people to keep an eye on the Anthony Weiner laptop. Now, this one is often forgotten about. Now, many of us will remember the story. That's Congressman Anthony Weiner, Democratic congressman, used to be, no longer, of course, tipped as a future president, married formally to Huma Abedin, unfortunately named Weiner, considering he kept exposing his wiener like a Hancock on CCTV. And they're all funnily named, these people. Their bodily parts that they're named after end up appearing on camera. So Weiner was caught repeatedly exposing his wiener to younger and younger women until he was eventually criminally convicted. This isn't any conspiracy. He's currently a convicted sex offender, though he's still trying to recoup his reputation, and most recently appeared on Patrick Bet-David, still clearly in denial as to exactly what he represents. But his laptop was said to contain incriminating evidence on Hillary Clinton because, of course, he was married to Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman, Huma Abedin. So those three, the Epstein files, the Hunter Biden laptop, and the Weiner laptop, form just one element of the many, many stories that will come out connected to the fixing of the 2020 elections against Donald Trump, and indeed connected as a result to everything else that is going on with regards to geopolitics and how it all links. But the beginning point for now is, of course, the Epstein Black Book and flight logs. And that's exactly as the New York Post is reporting here. Bill Clinton to be unmasked as Doe 36, John Doe 36, and identified more than 50 times in Jeffrey Epstein's document dump. Now, the point here is, what is the relevance of that story? What is the relevance, apart from the fact of the obvious, and that is, what on earth was a president of the United States doing flying to the island, the private island owned by a now convicted pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, who they want us to believe killed himself in prison before he could reveal all of his secrets. But apart from the obvious, and that is the salacious element of this story, how is it relevant to geopolitics? And this brings us to another story, which is a couple of years older, as you can see there from the date. That is a story in the Daily Mail from 2019. But the headline is incredibly important. And that is that Jeffrey Epstein book, I'm reading from the Daily Mail headline. Jeffrey Epstein book claims he and Ghislaine Maxwell were Mossad spies who filmed US politicians and power players having sex with underage girls to blackmail them. That's the headline. Going to the subheadings, Dylan Howard's book, Epstein, Dead Men Tell No Tales, proposed the theory that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were Israeli spies. To continue reading from the bullet points in the subheadings, it says Ghislaine's later father, Robert, that's Robert Maxwell, introduced Jeffrey to Mossad handlers before he died in 1991. New bullet point, Robert, who was also a Mossad spy, according to the book sources, told them to accept Jeffrey. They believe he and Ghislaine then lured prominent politicians and celebrities into sleeping with underage girls they provided, filmed it, and blackmailed them. There is no proof, the Mail continues, that Epstein has tapes of anyone sleeping with the underage girls. I would add that's because those tapes that Epstein clearly does have or did have disappeared. We're yet to see where they've ended up and with whom they are, but that's nevertheless the case. The Mail is stating there's no proof of those tapes. Everyone knows that those tapes exist. Continuing in the subheading, however, several of his victims say his homes were wired with cameras. That is the case. And that he kept footage in a safe. That's most probable. Both the FBI and New York authorities, which raided his home, are refusing to confirm whether or not such tapes exist. Neither confirm nor deny the tapes, but clearly, according to the witnesses themselves who went to Epstein's island, his house was rigged with cameras. The important thing, though, is the headline in this Daily Mail article. It states Jeffrey Epstein claims he and Ghislaine Maxwell, the Jeffrey Epstein book claims he and Ghislaine Maxwell were Mossad spies who filmed US politicians and power players having sex with underage girls to blackmail them. This then reveals precisely what the play was. It reveals that the entire saga, the Epstein saga, what was its purpose? Well, if we've got the suspicion, which we're going to continue to corroborate over the course of this live stream, that the Epstein global VIP pedophile ring was a CIA/Mossad operation to blackmail politicians in order to get compromat, in other words, compromising material on them, so that once you've got their compromising material, you can force them to either vote for, fund, or otherwise in the media espouse for policy positions that suit what the CIA or Mossad wanted to bring about. This is how it all connects back to what's going on in Israel at the moment with the continuing funding of the forever wars, as Assange dubbed them. Now, I'm going to continue to corroborate this point that indeed what is confirmed, and this doesn't require corroboration, is that Ghislaine Maxwell's father, the British-Israeli Robert Maxwell, was indeed a Mossad spy. That part is confirmed. That part isn't in denial. It is therefore very, very reasonable to assume that Ghislaine herself had senior connections to Mossad, as she was raised by a known Mossad agent who disappeared in suspicious circumstances off the end of his yacht and is presumed to be dead. But of course, who knows in these sorts of scenarios. But anyway, what isn't disputed is the father, Robert Maxwell, was a Mossad spy, and we know Ghislaine is his daughter. The question of whether Epstein was CIA/Mossad, it is now, that's what the purpose of the headline we've just read for you and showed you is, and that is to demonstrate that those who are researching this in the form of a book, Dylan Howard's book, they are now making these allegations public. This article, as I said, is from 2019, that Epstein was recruited to Mossad by the father, Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell. Now, you can see the logic there because, of course, you need to have compromising material on politicians, military officers, broadcasters, media heads, and all other manner of public official, Hollywood celebrities, sports people. You need to have compromising material on them to force them to do your bidding. And we're going to come to precisely what bidding they appear to have been forced to do. Because, of course, as we have continued to say on this live stream, by their deeds you shall know them. And again, to bring the quote up, after the 4 days of the ceasefire, the pause, war hawks will not be able to hide. They need war to continue. Their very survival depends on it. By their actions, you shall judge them, and by their deeds, you shall know them. That is a quote from the Radical Dispatch on that topic, on the ceasefire, the pause, when it was first announced. And we said that since then, you will see the war hawks be unable to call for peace and only call for war. And that's an example where such compromat, when it exists on people, against all odds, they continue to push a specific narrative. And that narrative, if you can trace it back, you'll see is the Netanyahu narrative. And so this is what we're going to establish over the course of this live stream. What was the point of the entire Epstein VIP pedophile ring that was global? It was to force through the global palace coup, which required the creation of the technocratic state. It required forever wars to serve the purpose of divide and conquer, and the pretext for bringing in further and further emergency legislation, curtailing our civil liberties, and of course the COVID mandate period from 2019 onwards. All of that, what you see were the outcomes of people being forced in Congress, in Parliament, in media, in army, and people being forced to say the most absurd things, to push the most absurd policies with a straight face, as if they weren't saying we have the right to forcibly inject you against your will or we will sack you. Now, normally, in any ordinary planet Earth, that's an insane thing to insist on the planet. And yet that was normalized and people that were opposing it were deemed the crazy, conspiracist, insane ones. And of course, people that were questioning the US elections were likewise deemed so. As a reminder, don't forget, this is what the fight has been about. This is an article from The Guardian with the headline, the Sunday Guardian's, the name of the Sunday Guardian is called The Observer, and it states there, LBC's Maajid Nawaz's fascination with conspiracy theories raises alarm. The radio host has been criticized for his tweets on the coronavirus and US elections, and that's from the 31st of January. But all of that is going to continue to come out. But on the Epstein story, again, just to continue corroborating this for you, that what it appears, remember, they told us there's no such thing as a VIP pedophile ring. They told us that this is all conspiracy theory. And yet, in our faces was Epstein, already convicted by then and then rearrested for running a global VIP pedophile ring. The very thing they told us was crazy to say existed. Anyway, we're going to carry on. This is an article, a headline from an Israeli newspaper, the Times of Israel. And again, you see the date at the bottom of the headline, 26th of July, 2021. The date there is not this one. That is an advert, but the date is this one, 26th of July, 2021. The headline states, for writer who broke Epstein case, a rumored Mossad link is worth digging into. The subheading, reporter Julie K. Brown isn't convinced the accused sex trafficker took his own life, obviously, and says associate Robert Maxwell may not have been the only one tied to Israeli intelligence. Obvious as well. But nevertheless, the purpose of showing this particular article is to say to you that even Israel's own press are beginning to question the entire saga. Important here is the date. You see, it's 2021. And that means it's a recent article, more recent than the Daily Mail article even. And we're going to come to an even more recent one in just a moment. But again, just to reconfirm the point that it isn't just the Daily Mail. It isn't just, Warrior Creed that are making these links and suggesting to you that Epstein was indeed an operative for the intelligence community, providing certain players with the information they needed on public figures to coerce them to agree to certain policy platforms. But even Israeli press are now making such connections themselves. That was the Times of Israel. But moving to a third one, and an even more recent one, is with an eyewitness on the subject, is Newsweek. Here's a Newsweek headline, and it states a similar thing, but this time from, as you see, October the 5th, 2023. And it states very clearly, Prince Andrew's accuser shares Jeffrey Epstein spy theory. October the 5th, 2023. Now, who's Prince Andrew's accuser? Well, that is something that everybody would have followed. But the fact that she shared Jeffrey Epstein's spy theory is all explained in the following quote from the article. Prince Andrew's accuser, I'm reading, posted a link to a Reddit post suggesting Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad or CIA spy. Virginia Giuffre sued the royal for sexual assault in London, New York, and the US Virgin Islands when they settled out of court in 2022 for an undisclosed sum. Andrew acknowledged that she was an Epstein sex trafficking victim. Key point there, Prince Andrew doesn't deny that Virginia Giuffre was a sex trafficked victim. The prince does deny the allegations against him. It continues, conspiracy theorists have long speculated about whether Epstein's wide-ranging sexual abuse was part of an elaborate campaign to acquire compromising material about high-profile figures and politicians on behalf of intelligence agencies. Newsweek has no definitive evidence to back up this account and no official confirmation, but it is not entirely without foundation. Well, obviously, it is not entirely without foundation. In fact, it is probably among the only explanations for why Epstein was doing what he was doing. If you think about it, setting up a private island with wealth that you've acquired by reasons that remain entirely opaque. And on that private island, you start flying VIPs from around the world, including the son of the Queen of England, to your private island. And why on earth would somebody take such risks to engage in criminal trafficking of underage girls and bring the world's elite to his island? What other explanation could you possibly consider for doing such a thing and having the audacity to think you'd get away with it if you didn't think you were protected? And of course, who would be the one protecting you? Such protection of such brazen criminal behavior cannot really exist on this planet without the cooperation of the intelligence community. Take that from us. And that is the allegation we're making, we believe, is a reasonable, rational allegation, corroborated by various media reports, and of course, in Virginia Guthrie's case, by an eyewitness account. Newsweek's article, as I stated there, is the most recent out of the ones we're showing, but all of this is going to continue coming out. And now even Fox News have jumped on the story of Clinton being among those that are named over 50 times in these newly released documents. And more of this story will continue to spill out into your corporate press over the coming hours and indeed days. But here is Fox News on the story.
We start with a developing story. Former President Bill Clinton is reportedly about to be identified in several court documents related to convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. ABC reporting that Clinton is mentioned more than 50 times across the redacted documents, which are expected to be released tomorrow. To Minnesota, where and now to your headline.
Now, that was from Fox News yesterday when it said expected to be released tomorrow. That's today. And indeed, it may already have been released. It's any moment now while we're on air or perhaps immediately after that those documents will be unsealed. They are official court documents. Now, this isn't breaking news. As I stated at the beginning of this live stream, we already knew all of this, but it's breaking news for most of the normies who require Fox News to tell them what we've been telling them since 2019 and before, who require the New York Post or Newsweek or indeed the Times of Israel to tell them what we've already been saying. So in that sense, for most people on this planet, it is breaking news. And a lot of people are going to be incredibly shocked that the president that they knew and loved is the first among those who have been named as a visitor to Epstein Island. But expect more. Expect Bill Gates. Expect many others on both on the flight logs and in the Black Book. I've seen both, and I can tell you there are some interesting names on there. The Black Book doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, that they visited the island. It just means they met Epstein, and he kept them in his little phone book. But you combine the flight logs with the Black Book, and you start getting a better picture. But even beyond that, what we're suggesting to people is you judge people by their deeds, by their behavior, because don't judge people by what they say. Judge them by what they do. Somebody could be saying they want peace, meanwhile, wanting to fund Israel to continue the ethnic cleansing and carpet bombing of Gaza. So as we keep saying, by their actions, you shall judge them, and by their deeds, you shall know them. And in that regard, it is becoming incredibly interesting, even in the media sphere, because even Tucker Carlson is beginning to cotton on. There's a post by me, you see there, it says, Tucker Carlson calls out pro-Netanyahu war hawks. A quote from the clip. People on the right, he says, who have spent the last 2 months focused on the conflict in a foreign country as their own country becomes dangerously unstable. They don't care about America at all. We're going to play for you that clip. And the interesting thing is that Tucker is beginning to realize that don't necessarily pay attention to this, what people say. Because people bullshit all the time. But if you look at what they do, you begin realizing who's the war hawk and who wants peace. And in this clip, it's Tucker very explicitly. See, you won't hear the name in the clip because it's just before the bit we're about to play, but it's about Ben Shapiro. So the interviewer asks Tucker about Ben Shapiro. And that's why in this clip, Tucker says, well, the person you named, and he continues to talk and give his views. The basic point he's making is there's a lot of people that are pretending to be on the populist right, who are in fact war hawks working against the interests of humanity. The veil is beginning to lift. If you had said to people in 2018 18, that somebody like Tucker Carlson would have more in common with these two on Warrior Creed, sitting in their bedrooms, broadcasting news that most people don't want to address. You'd think we're insane, but this is where we are now. He was booted off Fox, and he's got a very popular show streaming on Musk's platform, formerly known as Twitter. And he's beginning to push the boundary on all of this against the carpet bombing of Israel, of Gaza, and its ethnic cleansing. Here's Tucker Carlson criticizing those war hawks on the right who pretend to be patriotic.
I don't really care, but I did think it showed like the level of not just corruption, which I knew, but of like emotional instability and crazy. I mean, there are people, and I stopped reading any of it, but there are people on the right who have spent the last 2 months every single day focused on a conflict in a foreign country as their own country becomes dangerously unstable on the brink of financial collapse, with tens of millions of people who shouldn't be here in the country. We don't know their identities or the purpose of their being here. Like stuff that's could destroy the country for real and make it impossible for my kids to live here. They've said nothing about that, and they're focused with laser intensity on foreign conflicts. And I'm like, at some point, I've got 4 kids. If I'm so caught up in the problems of my neighbor's children and completely ignoring my own children as they get addicted to drugs and kill themselves, you know, I'm not against helping my neighbor's kids, but clearly I don't love my kids. I mean, that's the only logical conclusion. And they don't care about the country at all. And that's kind of their prerogative. But I do, because I have no choice, because I'm from here. My family's been here hundreds of years. I plan to stay here. Like, I'm shocked by how little they care about the country, and including the person you mentioned. And I can't imagine how someone like that could get an audience of people who claim to care about America, because he doesn't, obviously. Right?
Right. Well, I mean, Tucker, we've seen it too on free speech. I mean, people who become multimillionaires, who've, made entire careers, who've, literally became famous, on this very reason. I know you've spoken about this previously, but it's very important to our audience as well, is that, standing up for free speech rights of people you disagree with is probably the most important exercise. And we've seen some of that come for American citizens on Palestine. How do you work through this too, when we're both under such immense pressure, even social pressure of like, how could you support this? Take maybe the context of the university presidents. We've got billionaires like Bill Ackman, I'm curious what you make of this. My assessment is they're upset that they're not included as marginalized within the DEI regime. They claim to be against.
Now, the point we're connecting the Epstein list, the black book, the flight logs, everybody who's been caught with the compromat to warmongering how. Remember, the point we're making is once you're compromised and they have material on you, they can say to you, vote for this war, fund this war, cheerlead for this war in media, push our propaganda, or we'll expose you, just as was done during the COVID mandate period. Get on media with a straight face and say that we have the right to inject you against your will and you're the extremist for disagreeing, or we'll reveal this compromising material we have on you. That's how it works. That's the pattern we're showing to you, and that's what Tucker's exposing in that clip. He's saying these people don't love their own country. They're pushing the foreign policy of a foreign country. What on earth has that got to do with America funding war in Gaza? And yet here they are. And he was talking about Ben Shapiro. And the point we're making here again is it doesn't matter if Ben's got compromat on him or not. He's Netanyahu's boy in America anyway, right? But those who you wouldn't ordinarily expect to be pushing these narratives, those who would ordinarily try and convince you that they're for peace, and yet peace means carpet bombing and ethnically cleansing Gaza, or peace means injecting you against your will, sacking you from your job for criticizing, or peace means rigging elections. That's why we're saying you can talk the peace and the harmony, but it's by their deeds you should know them, and it's actions you observe to see who is peddling what. And that's why the clip by Tucker there was important, because it reveals what's going on, that those who claim to be on the populist right and yet are pushing war against the interests of their own country are not serving the interests of their country. They're serving the self-preservation because they have something over them, and they need to continue peddling propaganda so that something isn't revealed to the public. And talking of such, here is Exhibit A. We're going to play you an example of what happens when you're not speaking from your own conscience. Listen to this. Lindsey Graham suggesting that we obliterate Iran. Now, again, before we get to the clip, whose foreign policy is it to want war with Iran, right? it's clear Netanyahu has been pushing for this for a long, long time. But what we're trying to do is show you how compromat works and the results it achieves, right? The whole point of the Epstein ring was to have material on people so that you could force them to push the foreign policy of a foreign country over the interests of your own country. Listen to Lindsey Graham.
6 months now, hit Iran. They have oil fields out in the open. They have the Revolutionary Guard headquarters you can see from space. Blow it off the map. I've been saying...
Blow it off the map. That is exactly what he's been advocating, and others like him as well. And in this regard, we're going to show you the difference between those who recognize that they should be there in office, unlike Lindsey Graham, unlike Bill Clinton, those who recognize they should be in office to serve the interests of their own country versus those who are clearly being manipulated or coerced due to compromat into serving the interests of a foreign country. Compare what you just heard there by Senator Lindsey Graham to the following quick clip we're going to play you of former President Donald Trump talking about when he went to Israel in order to seek a deal. Compare and contrast and try and then imagine the difference it makes between those who fear information being released on them and those who, when they're in office, try and serve the interests of their own country.
It's going to have to do with both sides, but a lot will have to do with Israel and whether or not Israel wants to make the deal. As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do. Doesn't sound too optimistic, but that's... I was disappointed in Bibi, just on a personal basis. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, "You don't want to make a deal, do you?" And he said, "Well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal."
That is Trump making it clear that he thinks Netanyahu is the one that never wanted to make a deal, that Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, was like a father figure who always wanted to make a deal, turning the narrative on its head. Now, Trump is on, one time, on Epstein's flight logs, but he's not, as of yet, proven to have visited the island. But this is why I say, by their deeds, you should know them. You've got Trump here saying Netanyahu was the obstacle to peace, and Abbas was a lovely man that he enjoyed meeting. And all of the others are, like you just saw there with Senator Lindsey Graham, saying, bomb Iran, wipe them off the map. So you've got to notice here what the distinction is. Here's the Times of Israel making the same point there that you saw in the Trump clip, dated, as you can see there at the bottom, under the headline, 11th of December, 2021, relatively recent article. And it states in the headline from the Times of Israel, Trump, "I thought Israelis would do anything for peace, but found that not to be true." Subheading, in further quotes from the new book, ex-president says Netanyahu never wanted peace deal. Calls Abbas a father figure, claims he prevented the annexation of the West Bank, that is. He said, quote, "I got angry and stopped it," stopped Netanyahu annexing the West Bank. So we got a scenario where President Trump has blamed Netanyahu for the ongoing conflict. He's in line, we remind you all, with 94% of the Israeli public, as the Times of London reported, who also blame Netanyahu for the current conflict. Quote from the Times of London, you can see it on your screen, "In nearly every poll conducted since the war began, an overwhelming majority of the Israeli public has responded that they see Netanyahu as responsible and believe he should resign. A clear majority of Israelis also want early elections. That's from the most recent Times article and from the beginning of the conflict. So that one was from the 24th of December. This one from the 14th of October. The Times of London, quote, another poll found that 94% of Israelis believe the government was to blame for the war, and 59% of them did not have faith in its ability to lead the country. Trump is similarly on that view. He believes it's Netanyahu who has been the obstacle to peace, and Abbas was indeed seeking peace. Contrary to Netanyahu's narrative that there is no partner for peace, we can't have peace, and we need to ethnically cleanse Gaza. So there you see the effects of having compromise over somebody. You can make them do and say things that support your foreign policy, not the policy of their own country. And you can see the difference a man such as Trump makes when that compromise either doesn't exist on him or has no effect on him. We don't know which one it is. But whatever, you can see that if indeed he was beholden by such compromising material, he wouldn't be contradicting Netanyahu's line if Epstein was indeed a Mossad operation, a Mossad honey trap. But that's the argument we're making, that Epstein was a CIA Mossad honey trap to force politicians to do their bidding. But as you reveal this compromise, as for example, what's happening either now already has happened or during the course of this live stream, the names begin to be released. What you do is you take the power away from those doing the blackmail, because blackmail only works if it's secret. If the whole world knows, for example, that Bill and Hillary Clinton are compromised, you can no longer use that as leverage to force them to do your bidding, because the threat that otherwise we're going to release this material on you no longer works if the material's already out there, which is the advantage of transparency, of getting the truth out as far and wide as possible. You take the power away from the blackmailer. When you do that, you begin to see their narratives crumble like a house of cards, which is, of course, the practical joke. I think that's what it looks to us like, at least, the practical joke that Tucker Carlson made on Christmas when he interviewed Kevin Spacey in character. Kevin Spacey, of course, isn't a stranger to the allegations made against him. But I think what Tucker was doing was basically it was a piece of performance theater to tell people, a warning shot, that in 2024 the house of cards are going to collapse. Of course, Spacey's character Frank Underwood was the star of House of Cards until Spacey got booted off for also being revealed to have such allegations hanging over his head, though we must say for legal reasons he was acquitted of those charges in London. Now, again, that's the only reason the Tucker Carlson appearance with Spacey in character as Frank Underwood makes sense. He's telling us the House of Cards are about to crumble down. But how does that happen? That happens when you when the blackmail that CIA / Mossad Epstein ring has on these politicians, when those names are made public, they no longer have the power to use that compromising material as leverage to force the politicians to do their bidding. And what you see instead then is that the narrative starts crumbling and collapsing all around them. And again, that's something we're going to show you as an example of how that happens. So if you remember from the previous Radical Media article, that was this one, dated 9th of October 2023, which was the first article we wrote immediately after the 7th of October crisis. Israel helped to found Hamas, and all wars are bankers' wars, but peace is still possible. In that article, we played a video of a 25-year veteran of the Israeli intelligence agencies, Efrat Fenixon, who exposed for the first time to the world in that video that she suspected there was a stand-down order given on October the 7th, which is why it took the IDF a whopping and absolutely unbelievable 7 hours to respond to that border attack. Well, since then, we've had, and this is all related, of course, to how the narratives collapse when you've got no ability to enforce them anymore through blackmail. Since then, that particular narrative has come crumbling down. And to demonstrate that, we're going to talk you through it. First, have a look at General Flynn, US General Flynn, who appeared with Alex Jones talking precisely about that day, October the 7th, and how he now also believes there was a stand-down order. Usman, you'll remember that that very phrase, stand-down order, is what we've been using here on Warrior Creed live stream and in Radical Media since the beginning. That article we just showed you is 2 days after the attack. Since the beginning of the 7th of October attacks, that's the line we've taken. And this is the narrative crumbling in real time for you. Remember, Usman, we also said the window between bullshit narrative and public awareness of the bullshit has been getting smaller and smaller. From COVID, where it took 3 years, to Ukraine, where it took a year, to now in Gaza, where it's happening in real time as the emergency is happening. So here is an example of it. General Flynn speaking to Alex Jones, talking about the stand down order, which looks to him and obviously us as if the entire 7th of October attack was an inside job facilitated by Netanyahu to provide a pretext for him to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Have a look at this.
Netanyahu was aware, and I, you know, I'm not going to allege that right now. His southern zone, and I have called to this. His southern zone commander, the commander of the IDF, and the commander or the leader of his intelligence forces, they should all be removed from those positions, pending the outcome of a major, serious investigation to determine what caused the breakdown of security on the 7th of October. Because now, fast forward to, you know, we're getting ready to go into the 3rd month of this thing. Doesn't look like it has any happy ending, and it looks like it's going to go on. And we have all kinds of weapon systems being used against U.S. forces now throughout that region. So this thing is getting really bad, and it's because there was a decision made to have a security stand down on the 7th of October for 7 hours on the southern zone of Israel up against the fence line of Gaza Strip. And I'm telling you, folks, that wasn't done out of happenstance. That's not a coincidence. Somebody made that decision. Don't know whether it's Netanyahu that made it, his southern zone commander who made it. Somebody made it, because there's no way in the world for the security breakdown that the Israelis had on that day.
And General Flynn, you were telling me when we were eating lunch that you've been there. You've been given tours. You've been up on the towers.
I've walked it. I know what their intelligence, I know what their security system is made of. And I know the levels that they go through. They have multiple layers of defenses. They have multiple layers of electronic detection systems. They have drones. They have balloons. They have people watching from all sorts of cameras. It is one of the most secure borders in the world, if not the most.
So this is a major scandal.
Oh, it's a huge scandal, and that's why I say, like, we've got to fight this war, and we've got to figure out, we got to be very careful about we don't get dragged into something that we don't want. And there is a lot of people in Washington, D.C., the Uniparty, that wants us to just have this endless war where it's just a big racket of war, and they make a lot of money, and they make a lot of money off the U.S. taxpayers.
Where do people find your...
So that racket was, up until now, controlled by the Epstein honey trap VIP pedophile ring. That was we're alleging, a CIA Mossad operation. We're not just alleging it. We've corroborated that allegation, backed it up with various media references, and also said to you, it's bloody common sense. That's the only explanation that makes sense for what Epstein was playing at. You don't get to compromise the son of the bloody Queen of England unless you're supremely connected in the global intelligence community. So that's what we're saying is common sense. But you take that away by revealing all the names, you take the power away from the ability to blackmail, and Netanyahu's propaganda, the narrative begins falling away like snowflakes. It begins to melt, and that's what you're seeing here in real time, because that was a U.S. general, General Flynn, saying what we've been saying on Warrior Creed from the beginning of the event. He's now saying it openly, that there was a stand-down order given and someone's responsible. He didn't say specifically Netanyahu. Said it could have been Netanyahu, could have been his southern commander. We're saying it's Netanyahu. The Egyptians already told us. They warned Netanyahu that this attack was coming. But it gets even worse for Netanyahu, because one thing is having foreign voices like ours from the counterterrorism, counter-extremism industry or sector, others like General Flynn, clearly from the similar background, speaking on these topics. But it's another completely having Israeli citizens themselves go on full-out lawfare, legal cases against Netanyahu on this very topic. The latest breaking news comes from the Jerusalem Post, and that is news, as you can see there, from the 1st of January, from yesterday. The Nova concert survivors, says the headline from the Jerusalem Post, Nova survivors seek 200 million in damages from the Israeli Defense Forces, Shin Bet, and the police. Why? We're going to tell you in a second. The subheading: some 42 survivors of the Re'em Music Festival have filed the complaint. The article tells us why. So if we read a quote from the article for you, from the Jerusalem Post, a pending lawsuit from the survivors of the Nova Music Festival in Reim will place responsibility on the Israeli government for the events. Did you catch that? Will place responsibility on the Israeli government for the events of the festival and is seeking 200 million for damages for survivors, Israeli media reported. The lawsuit also claimed that since security forces were reportedly aware of the development of an unusual security situation on the night of October the 6th, okay, so since security forces were reportedly aware of the development of an unusual security situation on the night before of October the 6th and the early morning hours of the 7th, participants were still not sent home from the event. It is incomprehensible, the court wrote, how the defendants did not order the party to be dispersed immediately. The defendants there being the Israeli government. So the narrative that the Nova Music Festival and the casualties in that music festival were facilitated by Netanyahu's government precisely so that he could have the pretext to ethnically cleanse Gaza. In other words, the October the 7th attack was a deliberate false flag setup to provide Netanyahu with the excuse to invade Gaza, is what now even the survivors of the Nova Music Festival themselves are alleging. Not that Hamas didn't attack the festival, but that Hamas was facilitated in attacking the festival, that the Israeli government led by Netanyahu allowed for that to happen, at least by bare minimum through criminal negligence. But what we're putting to you as the Epstein-Mossad ring, when you connect all this together, you realize a pattern that you've got absolute psychopaths in power that are prepared to murder, pillage, rape, and kill, up to and including children, so as to achieve their foreign policy objectives. That is unfortunately the sad reality of the world, but all of that is being exposed in 2024 in this modern day apocalypse, the revelations, the unveiling that we're all witnessing in real time. Now, at the time, Osman, you remember when I went on Jordan Peterson's show to criticize him for adopting Netanyahu's narrative. He only got worse since then. But one of the things he tried to say to me on his show, and it's still up on YouTube for everyone to watch, he says, Maajid, but this is not some, organized network cabal around the world where they all know each other and they all plan. I said, look, it doesn't have to be. It's like a group. It's like groupthink. It's like crowd. The mob rule, right? That people adopt what they think those in power want them to say, and they start saying it. But actually, these revelations indicate what we've demonstrated today, that it was a bit tighter controlled than that. It wasn't just an egregore-like phenomenon in the air that people were adopting, but actually, if it's demonstrated as we're showing that this was a Mossad ring, then of course it would be tightly controlled, and the compromat would be stored on video files in Epstein's safe, as Virginia Guthrie has stated and other eyewitnesses have stated. So, in fact, contrary to what Peterson was attempting to nudge me into saying on his show when I met him, when he interviewed me or when we spoke, in fact, it does appear to be more tightly controlled. So this globalist cabal does appear to be organized in a way that would indicate a planned conspiracy to bring about a global palace coup through having such compromat on the world's leading elite. Prince Andrew isn't just anybody, right? Keep that in mind. Bill Clinton is not just anybody when you have such compromising material on them. But these narratives, as we say, lose the power when the compromat is revealed. When the plan is revealed, it no longer works. You can't blackmail someone if everyone already knows what you're about to reveal about them. And so, final piece of the puzzle for how these narratives are collapsing, indicating this is all connected, is, of course, Netanyahu's own struggle against his own government. Because even as we've just demonstrated, 94% of the Israeli public, and now even the Nova Music survivors, are all beginning to wake up to the fact that Netanyahu and his global ring have been the problem all along. Netanyahu may well be at least the public face of the head of the snake when it comes to this global cabal. It may well be the case. It's looking like that to us, at least. That when we talk about the global palace coup, when we talk about the cabal of globalists seeking to ruin our countries, it does appear, at least on a public level, that Netanyahu has been the leader of that mafia. And Israelis inside Israel know of this. To take you slightly back to before COVID hit, Israel was facing the largest ever protests in its history. This is from the Telegraph in 2023. It's during COVID and last year. But Israel's biggest ever protests as Benjamin Netanyahu's government persists with reforms. From the Telegraph, subheading, organizers of the rally say 500,000 people took the streets to demonstrate. Here's an image of those demonstrations from the same Telegraph. It was the largest ever protest in Israel's history. Why? Because Netanyahu was attempting to change the judicial system of his country so that the government led by him could appoint judges without oversight and thereby rig the judicial system. Why? Because he was being put on trial for corruption by his own government and was facing prison. Instead of face up to justice and have the law do its job, he instead tried to rig the system and change the law so that he could appoint the judges himself without oversight. And obviously, once it's his men from his cabal, about whom compromising material probably would have existed, once they're the judges, they would acquit him from any charges. That was all, as you saw there, the build-up to what was happening before Gaza. But now what's happened, and this is, again, the unraveling of narratives in real time, the Israeli Supreme Court, and this is the latest on this from today, Disclosed TV on Twitter, reveals Israel's Supreme Court strikes down Netanyahu's judicial overhaul law. It's getting to the beginning of the end for Netanyahu. His narratives are crumbling. When you've got a US general, as you just saw, suggesting there was a stand-down order on October the 7th, facilitating the Hamas attack on the Israeli side, when you've got Tucker Carlson, the darling of the right wing in America, basically saying that there's fake populist right-wingers love a foreign country more than their own, we're saying to you it's the beginning of the end of Netanyahu and his ilk. And the reason it's the beginning of the end is that their power's been taken away from them. They no longer have the ability to threaten people with blackmail, because what they're threatening to be revealed is already going to be revealed. You pull the rug from under their feet. It's like the scene at the end of The Wizard of Oz, where the dog pulls back the curtain and you see this old man there trying to turn the cogs, pretending he's a magician, and he's exposed. The emperor has no clothes. Netanyahu is near the end of his days, and 2024 is going to bring such an apocalypse. People will not believe what is going to be revealed to them. And this is just the icing on the cake. A lot more is going to come out. And of course, as we always say, time is vindicating. Osman, over to you.
Okay, I think what we've got here, Maajid, is that first off, when we were talking about the Epstein situation, and we brought and we start connecting the dots all the way back to Robert Maxwell.
Yeah.
And then because you just start looking into that history, and it's a deep history there of structuring and within that political sphere to affect the geopolitical sphere. Do you see what I mean? Because we're talking about international, not just national, because Maxwell had his fingers in the British national game as well.
Yeah.
But what this comes down to with this is that we've seen the post-COVID as well, especially, we've seen an international mindset change in a sense. We have moved more towards a global reality, in the sense of places that were once considered third world are now the upcoming first world. Do you see what I mean? And what I mean by that is that when Trump has the meeting and comes out of the meeting with the boss and says, well, actually,
well, we're going to get you back there. Sorry, lost you there. When Trump
has the meeting with the boss and then comes back and says, well, actually, he's quite a nice guy. That's because while Trump's in that meeting, he's heard what he needs to hear to keep his pieces on the chessboard moving in the way that he needs to keep them moving. Do you see what I mean? Because the whole idea of Israel, let's not get it wrong, is that it's been the idea behind it post the World War was it was an island in the middle of what possibly would have become a massive Arab state, because the Arabism was something that was something that, because post the World War, the whole concept of nationalism was what was used to shut down the previous structures that were the dynasty, so to speak, with the Ottoman Empire, with the Hungarian Empire, with the Kaiser. Remember, we're talking about the First World War.
Yep.
Yeah.
Moving 1924.
Moving us into a what would seem to the people to be a more demos centered system, meaning the rule of the mob, meaning democracy. Yeah, and what I mean by that is, and the reason I'm using the rule of the mob concept here isn't to lower the people or the station of the people. We're not talking about it like that. We're talking about from the perspective of nationalism itself and the way nationalism's used. We're not talking about politics used from a perspective of the interest of everyone, or we're talking about politics used from the perspective of emotional manipulation. Yeah, this is what you want, that they're against you. This is what we've got to do. Remember, let's not pretend that the geopolitics that has been at play post the World War, post World War II, has functioned from a perspective of imbalance. Yeah, when we look at when the Shah's taken out, and even with Iraq, when you've had democratic movements that have pretty much got themselves in place. Yeah, so democratic movements that would have come in from the power of the people. All of a sudden, you've had a coup to take that out, and a dictator that would do the bidding, so to speak. So the reason I'm connecting this dot in there is to say that it's always been in this. There's always been this interest of having the people that you can manipulate to keep your power in place. The problem we've got now is it's gone more from groups to the micro thinking with this as well. Hence, connect this bit here, Maajid. Hence, Netanyahu with corruption charges. Yeah, because what we've got here is, if we take, let me put my bit of evidence on the table in front of you. Pakistan. If we use Pakistan as an exaggerated microcosm of, so I'm talking about a parody of the microcosm that was of the macrocosm. So what do you see in Pakistan? They tried to use compromat on all the judges, all the politicians, and they have got compromat on all the judges and all the politicians over there. And you've got a government now that is that I think the guy that's in power now is the brother of the guy who was accused of the Panama Papers. Now, what you get is a very obvious example of corruption. Yeah, if we're blunt about it. But then, if we take our box of evidence and say, okay, this is what happened in Pakistan, what's going on with Israel, and what's going on with this Epstein situation, you see a modus operandi. You see a methodology where, oh, I see. So once you pull back the veil, you see, okay, well, how long has this methodology been in place? Is this something that, when we start looking into it, do we start seeing post World War that there's the moves were made in this way of with this methodology of compromising, because the concept of, because I'm hoping people can follow what I'm trying to say here, because when you've got a methodology which relies upon giving information, so the idea that when you're reading your broadsheets. I'm not talking about your tabloid. So let's go back before the fourth industrial revolution. When you were reading your broadsheet, the vernacular was different, but the emotional manipulation wasn't as obvious as what was being put across in the tabloid, because the tabloid was a comic book and could work from "they hate us" and this is what you want to eat. Yeah, so we're trying to sell you this. The broadsheet would function from a more sophisticated perspective of, from a collective point of view, this is what's best for us. You're the thinker. You're the adult within this. You're the middle class going up into the political class. Yeah. And what I'm explaining with this, Maajid, is there's something bigger that's happened here, which is the veil has come off. But what then happens is we get this test going on where is people's attention enough? Because for Tucker to ask that question about Ben Shapiro, if we were sitting down with Tucker at dinner, so we're not talking about in front of the screen, if we're sitting with Tucker at a table and we're saying, or anyone for that matter, and we're saying, well, actually, look, what's been exposed here is the entire structure of the game. And we've been, let's not pretend, Margie, we've been behind the veil with this, watching this stuff. We've been behind the veil with this. Remember the conversations we used to have around the table go, okay, well, we're going to have to, this literally is a case of sitting down with Pharaoh and explaining to him that he's pulling a problem towards himself with the actions that he's doing, because when you're playing this game, it really does function. They're thinking short term, and short term is literally, I'm going to keep going into the cave and trying to nick the dragon's gold. Yeah. And we're telling them that each time they've been doing that, the dragon used to be deep asleep. Used to be very, very deeply asleep. Yep. Now I've started noticing him twitching and even speaking to himself, because you can see the sleep's getting lighter now. Yeah, there's a point where you go and grab a coin and the dragon's going to wake up. Yeah. And what I mean by this is that it's all been short-term thinking. I had this conversation with my wife the other day. I was saying to her about when you start looking at all of this, even with Israel, even with the colonizing of Palestine, yeah, you could say, okay, it's all thrown in post the world wars when nation states are being invented. That's the argument. Everyone invaded, there's all this population shift. So from a rational point of view, if you're playing, remember our thing was because we're working with the patient, it doesn't matter what we think. Because you're working with the patient, you have to work within the patient's psychosis to try and get them to the most rational point. Yeah? The most rational point. So whether you had Arab states, whether you had a Jewish state, whether you had whatever monoform states there were, the idea was that, look, we're moving towards, well, we're in the fourth industrial revolution now, but when we were talking about it, we hadn't quite got to this level of ubiquitous information. We saw that we saw that experiment work successfully and come in with COVID. What we were looking at with this, we were saying, okay, look, let's look towards normalization, because we see a world with a generally, if you got you've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we had a parallel hierarchy of ideology, so to speak, we are in that state of, there's a general ideology that everyone follows around the planet now. You know, you go anywhere, ask someone what they want when they're thirsty. Most people can say, oh, "Can you get me a cup?" And there was the example given of the guy goes out to the Tuareg and he meets the kid, and the kid's got a Michael Jackson t-shirt. Yeah, in the middle of the desert. Yeah, the idea being that we're no longer dealing with mysterious people. And guess what? We get to this time now in front of us. And we've seen this with Gaza. Why is it that we've seen the protests? We talked about this last week because of humanization. Yep. But we saw an echo of that humanization with who? Trump and the boss. Yep. And the idea that the olden day cowboy colonialism that Netanyahu thought that he might be able to use, we'll kick the Indians off the prairie, so to speak. Yeah. Doesn't work anymore. Yeah, the in a time where you can't, in a time where if you do something, it's going to get sent over to the demos that you had under control before. You had the mob under control before with the tabloids, with the broadsheets. Yeah, information control was very, very different. Go watch the famous Cold War films that we all grew up on, Maajid. Yeah. You remember, I'll use an obvious example, they're Top Gun. Yeah, the first. But you go into that period and everything is they're good and we're good and they're bad. Yeah, but then a more sophisticated level of thinking came in. But then what made us go cross-eyed at the beginning of this? Ukraine war. People are like, wait a minute, you can't rehash this crap. You can't rehash such a simplistic level of thinking. Because we've had postmodernism. This now is part of we've had the post-structuralism and then conservatism. But I think we're in a new age right now. And I think there's a book here, Maajid, Post-Rationalism. Yeah, because what you've got now is that, and what I mean by that is the voluntary taking on of psychosis. I'm going back to the Tucker interview here, Maajid. Because Tucker's asking about Shapiro. Yep. The simple thing with Shapiro is trying to be polite, just a fucking stooge, isn't he? He's just a stooge for Israel. That's what Shapiro is. And one of the things with Shapiro is he doesn't really pretend to be anything else. He doesn't really veil it that well. Maybe he's exaggerated his own ability to discuss something where he's had students come on with obvious arguments and not realize, look, the game's up. In fact, the thing that you were criticizing, remember we talked about this is one of our normal conversations where we were talking about the post-structuralism and the logic behind it and how if someone understands it, the same thing that's bringing in the muscular neoliberalism, if someone understands it well, that it actually goes in and allows them to attack the conservatism veiled as traditionalism. Yeah, because it allows you to come in and attack that conservatism quite easily because it uses the same tools as the conservatism because it's talking about the idea of freedom. Remember, conservatism, even though I'm talking about conservative and the idea of liberal being like an idea of freedom. Conservatism itself is talking about securing the freedoms within a boundary where you stay free, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, point being here, Maajid, the compromise issue with this is, guys, hopefully you followed what's just been explained, which is the veils come off. The veils come off, and the sad thing with this is when the veil comes off, and it's literally in front of us that you are being manipulated, and even go and look into the history of the word conspiracy theorist. Yeah, me and Maajid, when Maajid was on LBC, I remember a week before we seen them and we said, okay, Maajid, they're late. They're late with that word. What happened? 3 days later, Maajid's a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, it's literally like you're at the train station, you're looking up at the screen, and you've got the list there of all the trains that are coming. Oh, wait a minute, conspiracy theorist is late.
Yeah.
That train's normally quite early. That's normally the bullet train. It's normally on time. Yep.
After that, of course, came radicalized.
Yeah, radicalized. And terrorist is it's my favorite one, because as much as fought that war during that decade, it's like you look at it now and it's amazing, because you're having to argue, or you're having to give people the tools to rationalize the fact that killing children, that a decimal number in the thousands of children, is terrorism. That destroying an entire city is terrorism. Yeah, Israel's been pretty successful. I think 1.9 million people have been displaced. Yeah, but the thing with this is, then we've got to go into the logic of that displacement, because this once again takes us into response and reaction, because we've had this, we haven't addressed this, Maajid, but we were talking about Hamza Yusuf getting heckled off stage, for example.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of the like to be on the mic, on the podium, on the soapbox guys coming forward, even though they haven't listened to if you listen to the entire lecture where Hamza Yusuf's explaining that, he's the one that contacted Chris Hedges, that he's the one that's been one of the most firm voices against this. But what he's warning against is the idea of democratic, the idea that, and when I say that the democratic protest perspective, where you're coming in and you're being angry and sensationalist, rather than, now does it work like this, Mod? Because I had this conversation with one of our boys today. I was explaining this to him. I said, look, you could have 3 people go into a room within that political class. Yep. Have a conversation, explain something, and things change. Protest is good. It's great. I'm not even like saying that it's a problem, but what I'm saying is when it gets to a stage of you're walking around, it's not righteous indignation. There's an imbalance. There's righteous indignation and there's reaction as well. Yeah, and I'm not talking. Follow me with this. What I'm saying here is that what Hamza Yusuf was talking about was, from a traditional point of view, it's always been a case of, if there's things going on, it said the people that are responsible and informed, they go and take care of those things. Yep, so the people that move forward responsible and informed. But the ones that are just causing, this idea of giving someone the firework. Now, Maajid, you're going to say to me, no, bro, you're losing the audience with this. I don't understand the point you're making. No, I'm the first one, Maajid. Remember, we're the first ones with the Free Palestine and we've always been on the cause. That's not the issue. What I'm talking about with this is, what was the main argument against al-Muhajirun? And this actually connects to the exact points we're making right now. What was the main argument against al-Muhajirun and Anjem Choudhury and those guys?
Go on.
The main argument against them was the idea that they were giving an ideological firework to someone. That they might even be informing them of something that, like Afghanistan. How much of what those guys talked about did Russell Brand expose? When Russell Brand was on, well, actually, the invasion of Afghanistan made, and the reason I'm using Brand because I'm trying to show that, look, even from the media's perspective, when America stepped out of Afghanistan, and then you find out that X amount of companies have made 3 billion over here, 1 billion over here, that the business project worked quite well. Then we had that with 3% of the reconstruction of Iraq going to who? McDonald's. It's all there on paper. It's not stuff that I'm making up. But the point that was going on with this was, these were the exact points, these similar points and the exact points that were being made by people like Anjem. But also, what was the recent thing on TikTok when Osama bin Laden's letter went out there and people are like, oh, you shouldn't be sending this around. Why? Because the idea with it was that the common man who hasn't been educated in the ins and outs of geopolitics and sophistry and thinking rationally, looks at this, starts responding, feels the whole weight of the entire system and conspiracy weighing down on him. Yep, because it's a big weight. Cognitive dissonance then wants to validate. It wants to say that I want to live in reality, regardless of the mass psychosis that is agreeing with this genocide over here or the poisoning of those people over there. I singularly want to live in reality, and if need be, I'm going to go out there and do something. Yep. How did Saudi Arabia was aware of this after the incident in 1979, when a whole load of crazies from Medina University took over Mecca, and they realized, you know what, we've got to ship our crazies out, so we better give them some boot camps and some like free holidays. So all of these things started happening around the world, and we got I think he even called himself a chaiwala. Certain imams that started going around paid by the Saudis to recontextualize the meaning of jihad in mosques in London and internationally. Do you see what I mean? Point being with this, that they understood the fact that when people are given what they can rationally measure as reality, even if you've got them in a state of delusion. So, do you remember The Matrix when the guy's sitting with Agent Smith, and Agent Smith's before he explains to Neo about how they'd come up with a utopia, but they kept getting a glitch. You keep getting people rebelling because you human beings can't live. You need imperfection and you need to protest. Then the other guy's sitting there and he's going, I don't know what steak tastes like, but I know I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But the point was that there's a minority there that will go, this is a glitch. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And in order to combat that cognitive dissonance, you'll find that zealotry happening. Yep. you'll find that zealotry happening. The point I'm making with this is, this connects to the Hamza Yusuf point. It's like when you hand someone a firework. They know that bloody thing, if it goes off in the house, is going to cause a fire, isn't it? Do you see what I mean? But some idiots don't. They'll stand in the middle of their house with the firework. That information is, and this is the whole point with this, that people don't know how to read you. If I'm going to give you some information, now Maajid, take this, it's poison. I've got to give you the antidote as well, yes or no? Yeah, I've got to put the antidote in front of you. Yeah. But if I just give you the poison, and this is the thing with this, it's like when you get a bit of information and you understand that the same thing that keeps you extrinsically paid back within your little bubble. Remember, your little bubble of 100, and if you've got a lot of friends, 150 people. Yep. And then the concentric circles out of that you connect to with commonality, whether it's nationality, the town you belong to, the football team you belong to. Yeah, so you've got all of these different, it's like a Venn diagram that is you. Different circles that connect, yeah? Point is that the strongest circle within that is often the circle of faith or religion or and that coincides with nationality as well. Hence, with Palestine, the same argument. But that relationalism there, the relationalism that keeps you at peace, keeps you functioning locally, is the same relationalism that gets weaponized and turns you into a crazy if you don't have the ability to respond. This is common sense, Maajid, yeah? It's absolute common sense. This is why we see all of the insanity that we see, because people are being given information they don't know how. They get given the information, but they don't have the avenue for proper response, because instead of being calm and thinking, okay, there's so many moves that have to be made to get to a state of peace, what we get self-fulfilling prophecies. Yeah. Remember, what's the other? We've talked about zealotry on one side. What other type of zealotry have we seen increase? I'm not talking about anti-Semitism. I'm not talking about anti-Semitism as I'm talking about the perceived anti-Semitism, and then this horrific Zionism that negates the human rights of the Palestinians, based on what? On a concept, on a logic of determinism. Let me explain this. A logic of determinism that, okay, so there's a concept that if you had an AI that could see everything that was going on the planet and could measure it, then it would be able to accurately tell you what would happen in 100 years. Yeah. Let's change the name of that AI to Jehovah. Yeah. And he's saying to you, from a determined perspective, 75 years ago, you came here and took over a land without any people. I mean, took over the land. And then all these people turned up, and they've been terrorizing you for a long time. Yeah. Terrorizing the poor Israelis who came and to empty houses, and one woke up and went, I'm going to invent hummus today. And I'm going to invent all of all the crap that they appropriated and said, oh, it's ours. Yeah. Point being that the argument that's being made through the zealotry is what? that you guys are looking at those kids and seeing kids. You don't understand it from the determined perspective that these are just little terrorists. And the problem with all this stuff, Maajid, is we've talked about the veil being pulled off. I'm pulling off the veil right now and shining a torch on what's underneath the veil, on the insanity of all of this. That's why I brought up the Hamza Yusuf concept here, because the idea of being able to think and make proper, rational moves and be able to discuss with people, because all of these situations right now, we've been there in the US. You were there with bloody ex-presidents, Maajid. I was there at West Point. Their security counter-terrorism units, their prisons. We've been there with people from those Israel lobbies discussing. And from the Muslim community perspective, so we've been in all of these little bubbles. We've been in all the circles, watching and going, okay, exactly the point Hamza Yusuf was making, Maajid. What are the tools for response to keep you? How can we work towards a peaceful reality?
Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is making that point now, which is actually the point we've been making over the course of the entire war on terror decade. And the response that the people attacking him, and attacking is an appropriate way to describe it, over this. I mean, some even refusing to call him Sheikh Hamza and calling him Mark Hansen, almost a takfir by implication, excommunication by refusing to call him by his Muslim name. And for those wondering who Hamza Yusuf is and why we're speaking about this, he's the Western world's foremost English theologian, English-speaking theologian, American convert to Islam, but has been around for years, and a leading theologian within the Muslim community who's currently being attacked online by the usual suspects for suggesting that the solution to the Israel crisis and the Gaza ethnic cleansing isn't perpetual war, but even from our side, we need to consider what happens next. And people are calling him a sellout for expressing such a sentiment. Now, the point I was going to make, Usman, is that the same voices that are going for him now, it's the usual suspects. It's the same voices we've been dealing with for over a decade, who are basically, they are entrenched, prop themselves up as the voice of Muslims, prop themselves up as representatives of Muslims. The thing is, I have absolutely no respect for them, show them zero deference, and say it with regards to them as it is, which is that they are the fringe elements within the community that arose in modernity and have more in common with colonialism as the bastard children of colonialism than they do with our tradition. They are those who subscribe to the dialectic of perpetual conflict, but instead of being on the Netanyahu side, are on the Muslim side, feeding that same perpetual conflict. Those who would celebrate, for example, terrorism as providing the Israelis with their just desserts and want more of it. There is no difference in rhetorical terms between them and Netanyahu, wanting to kill more Gazan civilians as revenge, in invoking Amalek from the Old Testament as he did, which is an invocation that necessarily implies killing all the women and children and civilian non-combatants by the invocation of Amalek from the Old Testament, as that story is known. Well, on the other side, you've got those who would similarly invoke mass murder in the name of some patriarchal father in the sky that would gleefully bathe them in their enemy's blood as if it's some form of baptism. It's those voices that are now coming after Sheikh Hamza for daring to suggest that there is a way through this conflict. But actually those voices, as you and I know, Usman, deserve no respect, deserve no deference from us. And in fact, their online assault against a scholar of our tradition is transparently childish and amateur, and time will eventually expose these people for who they are, which is online keyboard warriors that have no ability other than to insult, while only encouraging more and more division. And the way to deal with these people is not to address them or respond to them as if they represent Muslims and then be on the defensive. They don't represent Muslims, even though they claim to be. They don't represent our tradition. They are, as I said, the bastard children of colonialism, and they deserve to be, not in the language sense treated in that way, but in our behavior. We need to acknowledge that's what they are, so that we don't provide them with more significance than they deserve, which is the significance that they crave for themselves.
The thing here is, Maajid, that what we've got to do is like exactly what you just did there, which is to diagnose the situation. Because when you look at it very simply, that's why I sent you the little video with the guy. I don't know if you got to see it, with the guy explaining from a very emotionally driven and a very emotionally driven argument, trying to connect the martyrdom of a fighter in Gaza and say, look, this is what's going on over here. And then Hamza Yusuf saying this over here. You're like, no, you can't conflate the two things, my friend. This isn't what you've got going on with this entire situation is that it shows you the reality of that you can't generalize, and you can't look at things in absolutes. Yeah, because as soon as we start looking at things in absolutes, what you've got going on right now is it's pretty bloody scary, because even if we get to the other side of this, yeah, when we get to the other side of this, you've got an entire generation now that has sat there and watched IDF soldiers defecating in mosques, but they've killed thousands of babies. These are things we never even saw these things when we were young.
Yeah,
we didn't grow up with that baggage, and look at us. Look at what we went through and the level of
Srebrenica, which is what is, and it's in my autobiography, it's what radicalized me, right? The genocide of Srebrenica against Bosnian Muslim men and boys was the killing of 3,000 people. Gaza surpassed that within the first week.
I mean, Srebrenica, how horrific was that for us? Yeah. How horrific that literally the mosque committee sat down with my dad. I remember it, Maajid, because I had it was the same period. They had a Wu-Tang Kicker suit on that, because I got told off two things. One was this was the Bournemouth Mosque Committee sat down with my father, and this was after the Martyrs of Bosnia video that was sent. And I wanted to go to Bosnia, and a few of the guys there were Ben and one of our boys, Ben. We're ready. Get on a plane, and even my dad was like, yeah. They want to go. It's good. It's good for them. It took the mosque imam and a few other guys to sit there. This is where it kind of put my foundations in for the thinking. Even though when I was looking around at them, there was this point of, okay, I respect these guys and I love them, but they're saying that it isn't about going over there and killing people. And what was the argument that was put across? If you cut down a tree, what are you going to replace it with? And remember, how many years is it? It's decades later now, Maajid. I'm sitting here. If you cut down a tree, what are you going to replace it with?
Yeah.
If the idea of like that you can't just get rid of a life.
Now that's what we would call an intervention, but it's not possible to make such interventions for every young lad who's now already seen more children die in Gaza than we saw all deaths at Srebrenica. This is the problem when you're talking about the aftermath of this. There's an entire generation that have been exposed to more children being killed in Gaza than we witnessed in the entirety of the genocide in Srebrenica.
But also the other side of this, where that's one side that we're seeing, and about the other side where you've got justification for the killing of children, which you didn't even see, Maajid, with ISIS.
Yeah.
You don't remember people go, oh, but they throw out ISIS as, and yeah, those guys were bad. Yeah. I dealt with those guys. But those guys, with all of them, like every single one, I dealt with a lot of them. No one ever justified killing children.
Yeah.
Never. They would never. There was never. It doesn't exist. That level of like that logic of, well, they'll end up being terrorists, or that level of dehumanization did not exist. And guys, anyone who wants to argue about that they can get in contact with us. We can demonstrate that to them, that what we're seeing right now is something whereby that's why I use the word post-rational, Maajid, because it's people gleefully and happily like just taking on the worst type of insanity on one side, mixed in with maybe some other neoliberal insanity on the other. Do you see what I mean? So you've just got complete insanity, which is functioning within the same sphere.
Now, go on, finish that thought.
I'm saying the environment, Maajid, the logic here, if we step back for a moment from a bird's eye view, yep, and you go, okay, guys, you're living in the same city. If you've got London, if you're Germany, and really for people to be able to come and sit together, and we've had this with friends of ours, Martin, yeah, to be able to go and sit down with people and go, actually, look, yes, I'm Muslim, you're Jewish, if you want to talk about it like that, really, that's your philosophical stance. That's not, but we're also Londoners. We're also British. We're also, which bit connects? Because we might be sitting with that guy who's Jewish, who considers himself Jewish, and you got a Muslim guy turns up, and now we discuss a football game. He's like, yeah, I think Birmingham's going to beat him. And you're like, are you kidding me? And now all of a sudden it's like, you're with that guy against this guy. Because it's all, yeah, that's fun intersectionality. That's, or he thinks he might have a fighter that he's supporting. And we've got our guy on our team. We're like, you've really gone against our religion.
Yeah.
The intersection, the problem here is, Maajid, that this type of logic, it connects back to that compromat thing. Guys, what you've got here is, if the compromat that exists because they know those individuals can influence some section here to be against some section there, and then you now understand that this isn't being done with your best. They don't want your best. They're not bothered about you. Then what you've got to start doing is, you've now got to step back and go, okay, what is best? And guess what? You might find out that what is best is to go sit and speak to that guy that you thought was the other. Because
we're going to have to call it. It's time's up. What I will say in conclusion is that when the veil is lifted in this way, the apocalypse, the unveiling, there is a period of time in which, when the compromat no longer works because you've taken the leverage away from people to be able to threaten others with exposing what everyone already knows about them, what remains for people such as Netanyahu and his ilk, the cabal, the globalists, is sheer brute force. That's all they will then have left. So you're going to see a period of them attempting to double down and use their power to still get their way, because nothing else remains open to them as a path. That won't work. It's only ever short-term. Even that is only short-term thinking. It will backfire, as it always does. There's only so far you can push the masses of the people if you're in power before there's a backlash. But you will see a bit of doubling down. But I think that's all going to be exposed. What comes after the unveiling is the question: what happens when everybody knows how? Well, not everybody, but the people that matter know how the world's really working, and no longer subscribe to centralized sources of information, for example, no longer trust centralized sources of authority. Well, that's an interesting question, because what happens next is either the complete collapse of those centralized sources, and that's either chaos, or something new comes to replace them. And that's where we are. A decentralized future could avert total chaos. The other option, of course, from chaos is the globalists seek that opportunity and rebuild their technocratic tyranny. In other words, build back better. So what they're seeking to do in this moment, as everybody begins losing faith in their established institutions, is provoke that chaos, turn people against each other, so that they can have the pretext, even if you know how they operate now. Chaos means people start demanding order. And when people start demanding safety and security, you then bring in the technocracy and you have your total tyranny. So as a warning to everybody, as this veil is lifted, as we're living through this apocalypse in this way, it's going to be very easy for you to be manipulated by those who have been doing the manipulation, at whom you're angry already for all this Epstein stuff. Now, one example of this is, for example, let's take the case of grooming gangs. Yeah. Now, I've been obviously very vocal about that, like I've been very vocal about the global elite VIP pedophile ring. But if you take the Tommy Robinsons of this world and their behavior recently, when it comes to this recent Gaza escapade, and Tommy, Stephen, we've been very disappointed with some of your public pronouncements on this, and you should know better, because you do know better, because we've sat you down and spoken to you. We know exactly what you know, and it's really disappointing. But nevertheless, we've mentioned that before on this live stream, the way he ghosted us when we were meant to actually have a 1.5 hour interview with him on his change, and then Gaza happened, and he, almost as if he never changed, he went back to pre-COVID. But anyway, take that example and take the grooming gangs case. Now, there's two ways that can be manipulated, you see, because those who speak about the Epstein stuff, and if they didn't speak about the grooming gang stuff, versus those that speak about the grooming gang stuff and didn't speak about the Epstein stuff involving the Mossad spy ring, and I mean speak about it properly, not just speak about it as, oh, look at Prince Andrew, but no, what was it? Was a CIA Mossad spy ring led by Netanyahu to have political compromising people to do the foreign policy bidding of Israel and the globalist cabal in DC and in the city of London. So there's the Epstein thing, right? Now, if you speak about one and not the other, you can see how easy it would be for globalists to turn this group against that group. Look, they're racists. They're speaking only about the grooming gangs. And likewise, look, they allow for brown men to rape underage white girls. They don't care about it. That's what's been going on. And so even when you know what's happened, you can still be manipulated. One camp can still be used against the other if your motive for speaking about these things is corrupt, if it's corrupted, if it's ego. If you're somebody that only cared about the Pakistani grooming gangs because actually you're a racist and you're using that as a way to just attack Pakistani Muslim men in Britain, or likewise, if you only care about the Epstein stuff because really you're an anti-Semite, hates Jews, and you don't want to talk about the other stuff, then you can see how the people in power that were responsible for both will turn you against each other. This lot hate Jews, this lot hate Pakis. And so that's what's going on with the cenotaph trap that was set up, for example, during that large pro-Palestine demonstration, where they were then saying, look, they're going to riot. The whole point was to turn people against each other. Because when the authority, the centralized authorities that people no longer trust, when they collapse, as they are going to, right? As I say, the option is you have chaos. You can either then turn to total tyranny, and if that happens, you'll still have the same people in power, or you turn to a more decentralized system where there isn't these strong centralized authoritarian poles of power, but rather you have a multipolar world, which is what we hope and expect, by the way, for the world to move towards, and it's already happening with the BRICS developments. Multipolarity avoids that technocratic trap. Multipolarity on the macro level, all the way down to community level. In other words, on a community level, diversification of voices. Don't attack Sheikh Hamza Yusuf just because he says something that goes against your establishment narrative within the Muslim community, for example. So multipolarity is the solution to avoiding how we don't end up, how to avoid getting manipulated, even after the revelations, the apocalypse, into just turning on each other instead of looking up. And to conclude, what we always say here, don't stop looking left and right. Look up and realize it's the same people that were behind all of this. And actually, if we could realize that, we stop fighting each other and we start instead helping to liberate each other. Usman, any last words?
I think just adding to that point there, that if you're going to, what Maajid just talked about there is that if we don't trust in the people that have their responsibilities, so yeah, the baker, the brick maker, the speaker, we're not going to get any excellence. And you get a jack of all trades, master of none. So all you end up with is someone who generally knows something, and that's exactly the trick that's been played. So we'll leave everyone with that, and hopefully they can go and think about it or learn how to think about it.
Well, next week I'll be back in London, so hopefully we'll be back in the studio. But those of you who are listening, of course, we don't know how long more we'll have that studio for, because there are obviously, due to the cancellations and shadow banning and all manner of dirty tricks against us, there are some financial strains. But nevertheless, we'll be back broadcasting from home and the studio in London next week, at least until mid-Feb. We'll have that studio at least, but we'll carry on with these live streams, even if it's from other venues. But it's back next Tuesday, Warrior Creed, the usual time, 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST. And until then, thank you all very much for tuning in.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.